This is the first session in AC 106, Ayurveda and the Mind. Um, we will talk about Ayurveda's perspective on the mind, or manasa. What is the location of mind? And we will talk about the Atma and consciousness, since we do consider this to be a very significant factor in health. And we'll also talk about the prakriti of mind, sattva, rajas, and tamas. So these are the topics that we'll be covering. This is going to be about 2 hours. We will take a break at about 45 to 60 minutes into the presentation. And we'll have some interactive exercises as well. So, the first thing that we want to do when we talk about Atma is, when we talk about mind, we start with Atma. And the first question when we talk about Atma, now Atma is a Sanskrit word that can be used to indicate mind. It can also be used, but primarily it is used to indicate Atma, or the soul. And so we prefer to use the Sanskrit term Atma because sometimes when people say soul, what do they really mean? Do they mean your heart? Do they mean your, the breath that you breathe? Do you mean the life that's within you? Well, it is all of those, but a little bit more precisely. This is the definition of Atma, okay? It's a small particle of the divine that resides within the heart. That's the definition. According to, it is according to Ayurveda, it is according to yoga philosophy, it is also according to Sankhya. So Atma is this very small spark of divine energy, of spiritual energy, and it resides in our heart. And that's really what is the difference between a living body and a dead body. The Atma, or the self, animates the subtle body. And we're going to talk about the subtle body, or Sukshma Sharir is the Sanskrit term that we'll use, okay? So that is the subtle body. And the functions of the mind, intellect, and physical body are all related to the Atma. This is why we're starting with Atma. Okay, so think of it sort of like an onion. You've got layers and layers and layers, and inside the innermost layer is the Atma. Well, an onion is a rather pungent example, but you get the idea. You have this, very small spark. Now, according to the Upanishads, the dimensions of the Atma are 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair. So it is considered to have a very minute size, and also to be imperceptible. It is perceptible only by its effect. So it is an energetic thing. 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair is very small. It would be in the submicron range. So this is Atma. Now, there are some verses from Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita, of course, is a very important text of yoga philosophy, and it is also describes many important principles that are used in understanding Ayurveda. So in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita is entitled Sankhya Yoga. So it's chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita where we start with understanding basics. Now, it's a very interesting thing because chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita is basically setting the stage for the conversation. Chapter 2 is the actual beginning of the conversation between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. And this conversation is all about understanding the self, or Atma, and the three gunas, and the yoga process, various yoga processes, including dhyana yoga, hatha yoga, ashtanga yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and karma yoga. And it is in the very beginning of this conversation that we start with Sankhya, or the basic philosophy. What are the terms that we're talking about? And this is one of the first things that's described. So, chapter 2, verse 13, physical body changes and passes from boyhood to youth to old age. And similarly, the Atma, or the soul, passes into another body at death, and the self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. This is a very important verse of Bhagavad Gita. So this is to help you to understand what the Atma is. So think about this. You were once a little baby, right? And then you were a young boy or a young girl, and then you became a youth. You became a different type, a different species called a teenager. At least I know I did. And then you eventually became, you became a 20-something, and maybe that's where you still are, or maybe you're older now, or maybe you're in your 50s like me, but you're the same person. Now, how is that possible? Think about it. All the cells in your body change about every 7 years. Your body is continuously replenishing itself. It maintains, it passes on the blueprint of DNA. But, it's a rather amazing process, really, if you think about it. But the thing that's in common is the Atma, or self. This is the basic analogy that the Bhagavad Gita is giving to understand the Atma. What is the part that's me? Because my body is not the same as when I was small, but I am the same. Now I've changed. I've changed my attitudes. Maybe I've changed the way I vote. Maybe I've learned more. Maybe I take a different perspective. Maybe the things that made me scared when I'm a kid don't scare me, or maybe the things that annoyed me don't annoy me, and things that I used to like now annoy me. We all change. We change our attitudes, but the I remains the same. Think back when you were a kid, and how you were. You will certainly have been different. Very few people grow up without changing, but you are the same. So also Bhagavad Gita says that Atma pervades the entire body and it is indestructible. No one is able to destroy the Atma. This is another important thing about Atma Tattva. When we say Atma Tattva, we mean the science of the self. The Atma cannot be destroyed. It is indestructible. So the body is destroyed. The body is temporary. The physical body, or the Stula Sharira, but the subtle body, it carries the Atma from one body to the next. This is another important idea. So the physical body is destroyed. It is ultimately dissolved, but the Atma is never destroyed. The Atma is indestructible. Also, Krishna explains, Najayate mrete va kadachin. For the soul, there is never at any time no birth and no death. This is also a somewhat mind-boggling concept. The soul is unborn. What happens is the soul takes on a new body. And there is another verse which says, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, similarly, the soul accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. So think of it like this. You standing in your birthday suit are the Atma, and you're wearing underwear. You're wearing undergarments, and you're trying on clothes. These clothes that we're trying on, we keep our undergarments on. That's our subtle body, this Sukshma Sharira. And the different clothes that we're trying on, these are our physical bodies. We take on a body, we wear it for some time, and then it wears out and it kind of falls apart around us, and we have to take on a new one. This is how the soul is changing bodies, according to Bhagavad Gita. The soul can never be cut into pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. The soul is unbreakable, insoluble, cannot be burned, cannot be dried. In other words, the soul is not affected by any material element or any type of other energy. The soul is everlasting, all-pervading, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Now, when we say all-pervading, we mean the soul pervades within the body. How does the soul pervade within the body? By means of, does anyone have an idea or want to take a guess? How is it the soul pervades throughout the entire body? It is by circulation of, think about it. What is the thing that we are exactly? Thank you, Heather. By pran. Our pran is circulating throughout the entire body. So when you are doing yoga practice, you are focusing on pranayama. Doing asanas is helpful for doing pranayam. Pranayam is helpful for expanding our awareness throughout the entire body. And this is happening automatically. This is already happening. It is our circulation of pran that makes us feel that we are in the body. If we did not have proper circulation of pran, an example, when pran is cut off, if your circulation is restricted, you feel that a limb becomes dead. You lose sensation in the limb. If it's restricted long enough, then you can actually suffer injury. So it is prana, according to Bhagavad Gita, that makes the Atma pervade throughout the body. And it is also said, soul is invisible, inconceivable, immutable, and unchangeable. In other words, you can't see the soul, you can't measure it using physical instruments in a lab, and you cannot see it on any microscope. It is something that is noticeable by its presence. In other words, when the soul is present, we have a living body. And when the soul has departed, the body ceases to live and it begins to decay and rot. So this is just, you can read up more on this on your own. Bhagavad Gita is a very well-known text, and there are many editions of it that are available. But from the beginning part of the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, you have all of these descriptions of what the Atma is. Okay, so let's move on. So the transmigration of the soul. What do we mean by transmigration of the soul? How the soul is moving, how the Atma is moving. So the subtle body. Now the subtle body, this is a thing that we talk about quite a lot. It's made of ego or ahankar, mind, manas, and intellect or buddhi. The subtle body carries the soul or Atma from one physical body to the next. This is the basic concept of Sankhya and yoga, and it is also a concept that pervades throughout Ayurveda. Now, Ayurveda is, it is by strong implication, it is based on this concept of transmigration of the soul. Even though you will find this description in the Bhagavad Gita, and this is actually a paraphrase of one of the verses from Bhagavad Gita. You will find it in the Upanishads, and you will find it in other yoga texts related to the yoga process. This is a substrate. It is a fundamental understanding behind Ayurvedic definitions like Sharira Indriya Sattvatma Samyogo Dhari Jivatam. This is the verse, as you may have heard, it defines the Ayu in Ayurveda. When the Atma has left the body, there is no life. And Atma is a catalyst for life. So when you have the body, when the physical body has no Atma, then there is no life. Then we say this person has died. Now, it is interesting because the yoga perspective on life is that when the Atma is present, we say someone is alive, and when the Atma has left, we say that person has died. And we become sad when someone that we love has passed away. But yoga philosophy tells us they have not come out of existence. They have moved on. And people sometimes also use this as a paradigm for death. They say, well, this person has passed away. Where did they pass away to? That's a very important and relevant question. It's the Atma that has passed away, and it's the body that's left. If we understand everyone as being nothing more than the body, then when the body is finished, we say that they are finished, actually. But if we accept the presence of Atma, then they are not finished. Now that's a very interesting question. A very interesting question from Antonia. So, how long does it take when the Atma has, let's say, when the heart stops? When does the Atma leave the body? Now, there have been many people who have described out-of-body experiences. Medical science tends to look at this as a type of hallucinatory experience that is caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. Our perspective in Ayurveda and yoga is that out-of-body experiences are actually involving movement of the subtle body. And this has also been described by people who take various types of hallucinogens. For example, one popular book was the Carlos Castaneda writing about a shaman named Don Juan and his own experiences taking, mescaline cactus peyote. And he was experiencing going out of his body, traveling to other planes of existence, and encountering other types of beings. Now, some people will say, well, that's just, hippie trip stuff. But, from our perspective, from the perspective of Ayurveda, this is, you can have an out-of-body experience. Now, it also is an interesting thing because when you are in a what we will say is a very intoxicated state, if someone has taken such hallucinogens and the sukshma sharira is able to leave the body is able to continue going for some time, but one cannot. There is a connection between the sukshma sharira and the body. If that connection is completely cut, then the body will die. It's just a matter of how long. Is it a few minutes? Is it, it's basically as long as the body is breathing, and there are also certain things that prevent the body from deteriorating. And there have also been cases where someone has actually stopped breathing and come back to life after a couple of hours even. When people suffer severe hypothermia, falling, for example, under the ice and drowning in very cold water, and the body gets frozen very, very quickly, then it has been possible for someone to come back to life. And there have also been cases of severe trauma where people reported floating out of their body and seeing, looking down and seeing their body lying on an operating table. And, when they were actually flatlined. So what's the time? I can't really say. It's a very interesting idea, and I'm really not going to get into that further, except that, it is actually a very interesting concept. The short answer, I can't really give you a time limit, except that it's really not going to be very long. Now, there are also cases of yogis who practice siddhi, where they are actually able to keep the breath in their body, and they are able to travel in their sukshma sharira and visit other planes. But this is something that takes a lot of discipline and practice and many years of practice. And trying to do that deliberately would be a very dangerous practice, because leaving the body unoccupied, even if you have practiced how to keep it alive, is also opening you to other dangers. And even shamans and people who practice this kind of thing also will tell you about these kind of dangers. Anyway, but that's getting a little bit off the topic. It's the presence of the Atma filtered through the ego and mind that is manifest throughout the physical body via circulation of prana. So, this is the thing. Here's another perspective on death from the perspective of Ayurveda. We say that the dead body means that the Atma has left. What that also means is that what we actually find attractive in others, it's not really aspects of the body, it's aspects of the Atma. It's how the Atma is manifesting is through the mind and intellect and ego. And that's really what when we really have deep affection for someone, it's really because of the presence of the Atma, and it's the Atma filtered through all these other things that we actually develop a connection to. And we even, sometimes we develop affection for animals because animals also have Atma. Atma is there, but it's in a more covered state. And animals are more in direct touch with their bodily needs, and they do not really have the facility to move beyond the state of embodied existence and consider their own spiritual reality. So, interesting ideas. Transmigration of the soul is a very fascinating topic. You can find a lot of literature on it, and there have even been studies done on people, young children before a certain age who were able to recount details of a previous life. And in some cases it was well documented, and it just, could not really be explained from the perspective of a modern medical science. But, in Ayurveda, we accept this as part of how the soul journeys. So, subtle and physical bodies, what are the different layers we have here? So there is the ego or ahankar, and I've showed this as a little kind of inner wrapper around the Atma, and then the intellect or buddhi, which resides both in the mind and the heart. And there is the mind or manas. Mind is consciousness. Mind resides in the heart. Partly it resides in the head. It also partly resides in the pran. And it permeates the subtle and physical bodies via the vital force. So really, you can say consciousness, and you're talking about these things collectively, the ego, intellect, and mind. We talk about these analytically as if they're separate things, as if they're kind of separate organs, but they really function as one thing. And if you want to generalize, you can say this. You can say mind is consciousness. And in Ayurveda, we are very focused on the development of consciousness. So, consciousness is a very essential part of our health. It's not something that can be neglected. Okay. So, just briefly to talk about these different elements from the analytic perspective. So the ego is the first covering of the Atma. It's the connection of that. Remember we said the Atma is what? What did we say the Atma is? It is a spark of divine energy. It is a spark of spiritual energy. It is non-material. It doesn't die. It doesn't grow old. It doesn't shrink. It can't get burnt or dried out or soaked or moistened. It is non-material. But ego is our link. It's the connection to the other layers of material existence. It also has the sense of identity, this sense of ownership, and our sense of being the doer of actions. Again, it is a component of consciousness. Intellect or buddhi, this is it's our discrimination, it's our logic and reasoning and memory functions, and it's very intimately connected with mind. You can't really have one without the other. Sometimes we seem to just ignore our intelligence and go with the mind, go with what we feel. And the intellect resides mostly in the head. It can motivate the mind, but it can also be influenced to rationalize action according to desires. Have any of us ever been in that situation? Well, yes, I can speak for myself. It's very easy to say, oh, I am reasoning this, I am thinking this out, and I'm going to do this for reasons X, Y, and Z. But really, it's just based on what I want, and I'm making stuff up to fit what I want to do anyway. So we all know how that works. Mind, finally, manas, this is what resides in the heart, and it is intimately connected with the intellect and ego. Again, they function as one unit, really. It manifests the consciousness of Atma in connection with the body and the senses. It's the center of all sense activity. And it has occupations which sometimes are considered to be 3, sometimes they are considered to be more in number, but primarily thinking, feeling, and willing. What do we mean by thinking, feeling, and willing? We think about things, we develop feelings for things. I love this, I hate it, I like this, I don't like this, I don't care about it, this disgusts me. These are all feelings. And willing. What is willing? Willing is when I develop the will for action. I feel motivated. Sometimes we suffer from a lack of will. We suffer from everything else is okay and I'm just not really motivated to get up and do things. So this is also a mental issue. So what are some further definitions of mind? So the Nirukti, which is a Sanskrit dictionary, says manyate anena manaha. The mind is that thing by which we are able to consider things. It is that by which we know. It is the thing by which we are able to ponder things. It is situated in the heart but present all over. And it is an inseparable component of the linga sharir. Some synonyms for mind are chitta, chetas, sattva, atindriya. These are all synonyms in Sanskrit for mind. What are some of the properties of the mind? Again, according to Ayurvedic texts. Now we're talking more from the perspective of Ayurvedic texts. What do Ayurvedic texts consider to be important properties of the mind? Atindriya means it's the 11th indriya. It is a tool both for the sensory and motor organs. Okay, so what do we mean by that? What do we mean when we say that the mind is the center of the senses? So, you have your sensory inputs, right? Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. When you see something, you are actually seeing it in your mind. Now, of course, from the perspective of neurophysiology, you are seeing it in your brain. Your optic nerve is connected to your brain and you are actually perceiving the image. That's why optical illusions work, right? Sometimes someone has had a stroke and they'll smell something. They'll smell a scent that isn't really there. Because something has gotten changed in the wiring of their brain. There's something that has happened, some injury that occurred. The mind is the center of the senses. Now, how is the mind connected to brain? This is also an interesting question. We say that the brain is an organ that supports functions of mind and intellect. So, you can map out brain activity. You can read brain waves, and brain waves indicate different things that are going on. There's electric and chemical reactions that are taking place. There are, chemical compounds that one can take that alter the functioning of the brain. And this has an effect on consciousness. But when we're talking about the mind in the functional sense, we talk about mind as the center of the senses. It's also the center of the motor organs. So we don't have to think about moving my hand, moving my fingers. We just do it. This is a function of mind, and mind is also pervading via prana. So this is the 11th sense, the atindriya property of mind. There's also a property, anutva. It means very minute. So the mind is sukshma. We cannot see mind. We can only judge it by its presence or absence. And again, we're not talking about the brain. We're not talking about brain waves. Yes, you can measure the function of the brain organ, but it is not entirely what we're talking about when we say consciousness. So for example, recently there was something in the news about an MIT professor who was getting in trouble because he was involved in a startup that would basically give you a chance to die, and it would try to upload your consciousness and record your state of mind. Now, according to Ayurveda, it's a topic of science fiction, of course, and doing it in real life is it's a very science fiction-y sort of thing. But according to Ayurveda, really, there is much more to consciousness than the physical layer. There is a physical layer of consciousness, which is supported by the brain organ. But there's also another aspect to it, that part of consciousness by which we feel a connection with others, and it's not simply, like a computer that's running and that has some fuzzy logic and that can, so you could write a computer software that simulates functions of consciousness, but you would have to model it on some of these things that extend beyond the visible plane. So anutva, it is the mind is sukshma, it is subtle. We don't see it, but we can judge it by its presence or absence. So you can model it, you can understand it. We can talk about how the mind works, but we don't really, I can't show you a movie. Oh, here's a mind. Watch the mind run. Watch the mind think about eating ice cream. Watch the mind run to the refrigerator in its mind. I can't show you a movie of that, but I can tell you about it and you can say, oh yes, I've been there, I've experienced that. And that's how we understand the function of mind and consciousness. An example of the subtle function of the mind is how we're able to read a book. We don't think about reading the book. We just simply read it, and we are able to reflect what's happening in our consciousness. Ekatva means one. So the mind is one entity, but it's performing many different functions rapidly. So sometimes we feel that we are present on many different layers, but according to Ayurveda, there is one mind, but it is functioning on many levels, and it happens very rapidly. And to give an example, we watch a movie and it seems like we're seeing a live action, but it's actually just a series of pictures. It's 24 frames per second or 60 frames per second, and they're going by very quickly, but we are joining it all together. So the mind is also moving very quickly between different things according to Ayurveda. So again, we talked about functions of mind. What did we say previously are 3 functions of the mind? Okay, so now a little pop quiz. I'd like to know how much you remember of when I said there were 3 functions or occupations of the mind. I would like you to tell me in chat, what were those 3 that I said? Yes, that's correct. Yep, thinking, feeling, and willing. Very good. That's a good, thinking, feeling, and willing really sums it up. Now, this is another breakdown, okay? This is a breakdown that's just a little bit more in detail. Thinking, feeling, and willing is kind of a no-brainer, easy to remember, hard to forget, okay? I think about something, I develop feelings about it, and then I develop the will for action. Now, another way of thinking about functions of the mind is thinking, vichar, and judging or considering, uhya, to set goals, or dhyaya, deciding what is the thing I want to do. Taking a decision, sankalpa, when we decide, here's what I'm going to do. To keep control of oneself, swasya nigraha, and to control the organs, indriya nigraha. Now, these are basically just sub-functions, and it is a different breakdown. So for example, willing involves sankalpa, swasya nigraha, and indriya nigraha. Setting goals is also crosses over into the willing as well as feeling. And the judging and uhya and dhyaya, they all come under the category of feeling. And of course, thinking, well, that is thinking. And also there may be some dhyaya involved in there as well. So this is a different model for looking at the functions of mind, kind of from top to bottom. We think about something, we consider it and evaluate it, we set our goals, what are the things to be done, we take decisions about what is to be done, We guide our own focus based on what we have decided. And finally, we control our organs. We make our arms and legs and mouth do things according to what we have decided. Okay. So this is a different paradigm for the functions of mind. You know, you can think of it in this model. You can think of it in the thinking, feeling, willing model. They are not incompatible. They are basically different ways of looking at it. The thinking, feeling, and willing is a more simplified paradigm for understanding the functions of mind. So you can look at either one. But you really need, this is one thing that you really need to understand. We also sometimes refer to these functions as occupations, where the Sanskrit word used is vritti. Vritti means occupation. You know, what the mind does. All right, so let's move on. So I hope this makes sense. Does this make sense? Are you all understanding this so far? You know, because this is actually a very key and very core concept in terms of mind. It also comes into play a lot when we are, you know, considering how to work with people. You know, as an Ayurvedic practitioner, you have to sometimes motivate people to do things, and it's actually useful to look on this model, or look on the thinking, feeling, willing model in terms of how to motivate. You know, you get someone to think about something positive, and then you get them to feel that this is a state that they would like to be in. Hey, you would like to be beyond your current state of being miserable, and you would like to have better digestion, better health, better elimination. And, you know, these are the things you can develop a will for by feeling strongly about it. Also, if you actually have a concept of your healthy state and you think on that, it actually is good for your health. So let's move on. Okay, so again, breaking it down, vichar, or thinking, the uhya, or judging and considering, indriya nigraha, keeping control of the organs, swasti nigraha, to keep control of the self and to take decisions, or sankalpa. Now, so one of the core concepts, one of the things that I really need you to understand are the vrittis, or occupations. The thinking, feeling, willing, or this the vichar and uhya, etc. model. The other very important thing to understand is the concept of the three gunas. The three gunas are essential components of the mind. You know, so we talk about the body. Now, when we talk about the body, what are the three essential things that we talk about in Ayurveda? What are the three? And I'm not going to say the things because that would just be a dead giveaway. So please go ahead and tell me in chat. Don't be shy. Go ahead and put it in there. What are the three essential things in the body that we consider in Ayurveda? What are those three things? Dosha, yes, that's correct. Well, Agni is also another part of it. That's also correct. But, you know, the most essential thing, I mean, there are 7 types of Agni and Pran. Yeah, this is also important. But the three things are Kapha, Pitta, Vata. We have these three are in different proportions in all of us. So if someone has more of the kapha dosha, then we say their prakriti is kapha, right? You know, we talk about prakriti, and then vikriti is how your constitution has been transformed by whatever you are undergoing, whatever stress or sickness or whatever. So just as you have the three doshas, so we collectively refer to these as tridosha. Okay, so all good answers, but really, from the body perspective, it's Tridosha that's important. From the mind perspective, now we're talking about mind, the three gunas are essential: sattva, rajas, and tamas. These are to the mind what the Tridoshas are to the body. Now, I cannot possibly emphasize this enough. This is one of the very fundamental things. So, it's the kind of thing that you really need to have to be able to answer off the top of your head. What are the three essential, let's say, instead of components, I would say characteristics that affect the mind? It's the three gunas. Sattva gun is the mode of light, intelligence, and enlightenment. Rajas is the mode of the guna of activity, turbulence, change. And tamas is the mode of the guna of inertia, darkness. You may also remember when we talk about Sankhya, the mind arises from ahankar in sattva gun. So the mind is naturally balanced when there is more sattva gun. The body and matter arises from ahankar in contact with tamogun, buddhi or intelligence, ahankar in contact with rajogun. Now this is a very important little review item to consider. Let me write these in here. So mind comes from ahankar and sattva gun. Intellect comes from ahankar in rajogun. And the matter and physical body from ahankar in tamogun. So this is the relation of the three gunas in Sankhya. In the mind, in considering the mind, these three gunas produce an influence. And the influence of the mind, this is one of the very important core topics that we're going to talk about. We are coming up soon, I think within the next 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to stop for a break. So sattva, rajas, and tamas, these are the three gunas which exist in different combinations. Think of colors. They are like primary colors. We've showed two of them overlapping here. You can take three primary colors and you can combine them in a very large number of ways, and you can get pretty much every imaginable color: red, green, and blue, or cyan, magenta, yellow, black. You can combine these colors in, this is what your computer is doing. It's using primary colors and combining them in different proportions to give you a whole realm of colors, including, cerulean blue and baby blue and sky blue and brick red and pink and every other color. So, but just as you have these three primary colors, you also have these three gunas, and these three gunas exist in unlimited combinations. And it is the influence of the gunas on the mind that changes the way the mind operates. To give one example, when the mind is afflicted by tamogun, the mind will be afflicted by tamogun. One activity that produces tamogun is intoxication. If you take intoxication, one of the most common intoxicating drugs is alcohol, and alcohol has an effect of increasing tamogun. What happens when people are under the influence of alcohol? They say foolish things, or they say drunk is when you feel sophisticated but you can't say it. People will act very foolishly and feel like they're being really clever and witty, and it affects our judgment. It makes us do things that we sometimes later regret. That's because from the Ayurvedic perspective, you have plunged deeper into tamogun. Rajogun, for example, there's an increase of Rajogun in anything related to the opposite sex, anything related to sexual activity. This is a function of Rajogun. Rajogun is the quality of passion, desire, wanting things. It's not just wanting contact with others, but it's also sometimes wanting things. This is Rajogun. We become motivated. People sometimes, have motivational talks to try to get your consciousness more in Rajogun. Because if you are in Tamogun, like you are feeling lazy and you feel like not doing anything, it's very hard to go directly to Sattvagun from Tamogun. You want to try to get to Rajogun. You want to try to be motivated. Hey, come on, get up, get out of bed, go get a job. I know you got fired and then you got really sad and you went and got drunk and now you've got a horrible headache, but now you need to get up and take a shower and go look for work. That's an example of a little motivational speech that someone might be given to try to get out of the influence of tamogun on the mind to rajagun. And sattvagun is the mode of purity. It's the mode of enlightenment. It's the mode of, hey, we are going to live a very clean life and we're going to get away from things that are, concepts that are greedy and selfish, and to be open and loving toward others, and to try to live in harmony with our existence, and to be fully aware of everything. That is when the mind is in sattvagun. Okay, so just a very quick, overview there of what we're talking about. And just to give some examples from real life of how these three gunas could be, in kind of the exaggerated way, how they can influence the mind. In reality, you have unlimited combinations, so many combinations, but in general, when you feel kind of pulled down and not motivated, it's tamogun that's predominant. And when you feel too, frantic and you just can't stop, or you become selfish or inconsiderate, that's rajagun that's in effect. Like you flip someone off because they cut you off in traffic. That's rajagun, 100%. And rajogun also sometimes leads to tamogun, especially if under the influence of rajogun, when we want things very much. And what's the thing that tends to happen when we want something really badly and our want for it is frustrated, especially if the frustration comes at the action of others? What's the thing that tends to result more often than any? What emotion tends to result? You all know. Somebody can tell me. Go ahead. Let's say it. What happens when you're want exactly? And what does anger lead to? Anger anger leads us down the path to tamogun, because anger is tamasic. Anger is destructive, and that's why we have that kind of progression. And if someone is more sattvic, they have reduced the intensity of their wants. They are able to motivate themselves based on knowledge and understanding rather than on wanting. Because when we do things based on want, it very often and very easily can lead to anger. All right, so let's move on. So before I get into this, let's take a short break and just give you about 2-minute break for a chance to grab some water, use the bathroom or whatever. Okay, so Now, there's another interesting part. We talked about the gunas in the mind. We talked about sattva gun, rajogun, and tamogun in the mind. So that's a kind of a general way. Now, there are also something called kaya, or body. So if the body is more sattvic in nature, it will also have an effect. So the interesting part here is that mind is a two-way street. Mind is influenced by our body and by our bodily habits, our physical habits, our habits like, cleanliness. And we also will accumulate emotional energy in our body tissues. So for example, if someone is angry all the time, that's something that tends to accumulate. We get part of it is, we get our genetics from our parents. This has an effect on our prakriti, but our physical attributes also have an effect on our consciousness. Consciousness has an effect on our body, and our body has an effect on consciousness. And what we do, what we eat, what we consume also has an effect on our consciousness. It's just sometimes not so easy to measure in the short term. So let's talk about sattva gun, and we're talking about it from the perspective of what's called the sattvic kaya. Sattvic kaya means the body which is more sattvic in nature. So someone with a sattvic kaya will have good intelligence and memory. They will naturally have goodwill, and they will allow others to prosper well. They will show patience and courage. They will have an interest in music, dance, poetry, fine arts. They will be compassionate, devoted to spiritual rituals, and express purity of thoughts. They will tend to do good deeds. They will have good discrimination, and they will be devoted to helping others. These are all characteristics of the person who has the predominance of sattva gun in their mind and body. Rajogun, the rajasic kaya, this will give someone the property to overpower or control others. And also they may have a lot of dynamic energy. They may be very ambitious and industrious in nature. Again, understand that we're talking about this in a, it's almost like we're giving a theoretical case of someone who is purely sattvic, purely rajasic, and purely tamasic. But in reality, we're all a mixture. So it'll be mixed all over the place, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So, understand the archetype, and then you can see how parts of it fit in. So the Rajogun, Rajasic Kaya person, they will be ambitious, they will be industrious, they will work hard, they will be very motivated to work toward a goal. And they may also become very hot-tempered and very egoistic, very possessive. They will have bravery along with jealousy. Yeah, you can't get ahead of me. I'm not going to allow that. And they also like physical and verbal disguise. They don't feel any need to be straightforward. They will do whatever it takes to win. Creative and constructive deeds, these are rajasic. And the food that is liked by the person with rajasic kaya will maybe be spicy or sour. So these are some qualities of Rajogun as manifest in the body. Tamogun will tend to cause someone to be lazy and ignorant. There may be excessive indulgence in food and in sexual activity. There may be a lack of natural intelligence, like no common sense. There may be an avoidance of cleanliness. No, I'm not going to take a bath. I like to stink. And there's a lack of health consciousness. Yeah, I know this isn't good for me, and that's why I love it so much. That's a very tamasic attitude toward things. It's like the whole meme about bacon nowadays. People are like, okay, this is a really unhealthy food, and Red meat in general is not healthy, and people are just like, they like to flaunt the fact that I like something that's not healthy just because I can. Well, that is a tamasic attitude. It's a very tamasic attitude. And, that's just to give one example. You can probably fill in the blanks and come up with other examples of tamasic attitudes that are common in today's pop culture. Again, tamasic kaya individuals will sleep excessively. They like to be inactive. They will tend to engage in destructive, violent acts. They may indulge in theft. Theft would also be a tamasic deed. Doing vandalism, just destroying things just for the sake of it. That's also tamasic. Food that may be liked by someone who is more tamasic in nature will be stale, rotten, and unpleasant. Interesting question. How do we change these? So, we talk about the gunas, and so what we're trying to do is we're trying to first recognize and see the influence of the gunas and how these gunas translate into various things. So it's a very good question. How do we change this? So understanding, the first thing is to understand. Everything should be based on understanding, right? We first need to be able to understand. Just like in Ayurveda, we look at the imbalance. We must identify the imbalance. We examine, we do sparshanam, darshanam, right? We see the person and we talk about their habits. We do the prashnam. We make inquiries. We find out, well, what are you eating? What are your habits? What are the things that you do? So, yeah, and then when you understand the things that tend to induce more tamogun, incidentally, a lot of it is very common sense. And getting someone, kapha persons will tend to be stubborn, and they will tend to be, they will tend to be stubborn. Getting someone to change can be very difficult. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, is the way the saying goes. And when people are able to be in touch with the spiritual side, spiritual activities will naturally tend to lead to an increase of sattva gun, because the Atma does not have any gunas attached to it. The only gunas attached to the Atma are the ones that are found in worldly life. So taking up a more pure life will naturally lead to increase of sattva gun. Improving diet, going away from going to a more plant-based diet will automatically help someone to be more sattvic in nature. It's the problem is that Rajogun is the main focus of Western society. I would say that if we characterize countries by gunas, America has a very strong emphasis on Rajogun. It's all about gain, increase, getting more. Rajogun very easily leads to tamogun. America has so many homeless people. People just sometimes they get involved in drugs. They lose their job. It's very easy to fall through the cracks. That happens a lot. And then getting out of tamogun can be very difficult. So generally, the best way to help someone get out of tamogun is they need to be motivated. They need to get, you need to move from tamogun to rajogun, but you need to also have your eyes on becoming more sattvic, and reducing the things that produce the tamasic influences is a good first step. So more plant-based diet, getting exercise, getting out in a natural environment. This is also something that's helpful. It's also common sense, in terms of health, is, getting to the point of being focused on your health, and that is also actually helpful for consciousness. The problem is when people become obsessed with, oh, I want to be ripped, and now you're focused on a very rajasic approach. I want to look good. I want to look good, and I want other people to admire me. No, the goal should be health. But first, sometimes we have to get out of tamogun into rajagun, and then keep moving upward from rajagun to sattvagun. So it's a very interesting question. There is not an easy answer for it, but really what we're starting with is, identifying the things, and particularly identifying the things that increase tamogun. And if you can find a way to decrease those, that's a good first step. Now, this is again talking about the gunas and their properties. So sattva, so the columns going down, you have sattva, rajas, and tamas. So sattva gun is it's the guna of intelligence, light of knowledge, enlightenment, purity. And there are different kayas. These are just Sanskrit names for different body types that are associated with the gunas. Arsha, Brahma, Mahendra, Yama, Varuna, Kubera, Gandharva. And properties are good intellect, memory, patience, and courage. Actions devoted to good deeds, spiritual rituals expressing purity of thought, and food would be sweet, refreshing, and nourishing, and very natural. Rajagun is the mode of activity, turbulence. Kaya are asura, rakshasa, paishachika, sarpa, preta, and shakuna. Qualities would be short-tempered, egoistic, having bravery along with jealousy, not wanting to share. Actions might be creative and creating things, doing constructive, especially if it results in gain. Food will be spicy or sour. Tamogun is the mode of inertia and darkness. Kaya types associated with tamogun are pashava, matsya, vanaspatya. Properties are lazy, ignorant, not health conscious. Actions may be destructive, involved in violence and theft, and food would be stale, rotten, and unpleasant. These Sanskrit names of different body types, Arsha means having a body like a sage, Brahma means having a body like the creator, Mahendra having body like the king of heaven, Yama having body like the lord of dharma, Varuna having a body like the lord of the oceans, Kubera like the lord of wealth, and Gandharva like an angel. Asura is having a body like a demon, Rakshasa like that of a man-eater, Paishachika like a devil, Sarpa like a serpent, Preta and Shakuna are like ghostly beings. And tamasic bodies, Pashava, beastly, Matsya like a fish, eating everything, and Vanaspatya like a tree. So these are just some of the interesting poetic names, and there are of course descriptions that go with each of these, but we're just giving a very short summary just to get so that you get an idea. So these are the various. So let's talk about perception of knowledge. How is knowledge perceived by the mind? So you have the Indriya Vishaya. What are the Indriya Vishaya? The Indriya Vishaya are the subjects of the sense organs. What are the things that we're trying to perceive? Okay, here's an orange. I can perceive it. It has a look. It's orange in color. Maybe it has a thick peel. It's a navel orange. If I scratch it a little bit, I'll get some aroma. I'll get a scent. I'll smell some of that orange oil. If I hold it, I'm going to feel it has that bumpy texture. If I taste it, I'll taste that combination of sweet and sour, and also it has a smell. So all five senses are engaged with that one Indriya Vishaya. And there are the indriyas. I am involving my indriyas or sense organs. And there is the manas, the mind. This is where I'm perceiving these things. So for example, there's a fruit called durian. I love giving examples with durian in Ayurveda and the mind. I don't know if you've ever tried durian. I tried it once because I had to try it. I heard that there was a fruit, and some people found it disgusting, and some people call it the king of fruits. Well, my conclusion was that, yeah, it was kind of disgusting, but I did eat some and just try it. And my conclusion was, well, this may be a fruit. It may be all natural and all that, but wow, this is really tamasic, and I just don't like it because it had a nasty texture and a kind of a nasty smell to it. But I had to try it. So, but the point here is that in my perception, I didn't like durian. Somebody else is going to eat it and they're going to say, oh, baby, this is the greatest thing. I've got to have more of that durian. And there's even, if you go to Malaysia and Singapore, they'll even have signs up on elevators and subways, no eating of durian. You cannot even eat it in public because the smell of ripe durian is, I won't even describe it, but it is, many people, and I'll include myself in that category, are going to consider it highly offensive. Other people are going to say, oh yeah, I love that. Can't get me enough of that durian. Oh, yes. This is just an example that our perception is really in the mind. It's really how we perceive it. It is not, it's the same Indriya Vishaya, and Indriyas are comparable between myself and somebody who likes durian. But in the mind, in my mind, it's disgusting, and in someone else's mind, it's great. Buddhi is also involved in our perception of knowledge, our intellect, how we deconstruct things, how we analyze, how we categorize. And finally, the Atma, or the soul. This is what's underlying all of it. And then when you have the soul, mind, indriyas, and the objects of the senses, and these all remain in contact with each other, then we get knowledge. This is how we are perceiving knowledge. These are all things that are involved in our perception of knowledge. Okay. Now, here is another example from Bhagavad Gita. And there's a painting that goes with this one. Atmanam ratanam vidhi shariram ratamevacha buddhim tu sadatim vidhi mana pragraham evacha. So this is in Bhagavad Gita. It is described that the Atma is like the person who is being driven in the chariot. So you have this person here who's being driven in the chariot. And then you have the Rata, the chariot itself. This is like the body. The Sarati, the driver, this is like the Buddhi, or the intelligence. And then there is the reins by which the horses are controlled. This is the mind. And the horses are the Indriyas. There's even an illustration that shows the horses with emblem of eyes, ears, and nose on them, which illustrates that. But this is the example given in Bhagavad Gita. So think about this for a second, okay? So the Atma, you are residing within the body. The body is a vehicle. It is a vehicle for you to experience things, to taste things, to know things and understand them. And the body is the chariot. Now you can get out of the chariot and you can get another chariot. Maybe it's an upgrade, maybe it's a downgrade. Maybe you are in the chariot parking lot for a while waiting for a new chariot to become available. The point is that, you know, the body is a thing that changes, and it grows old, it dies at some point. And when we are able to control the senses, the working senses, and also to direct our knowledge acquiring senses, This is a function where the intelligence is involved. Where are we going to go? These are the kind of things that are done through our understanding, through our use of intelligence. Intelligence and mind are working together. And this is all the function of consciousness. So this is a different view. We talked about consciousness, and now we're talking about basically what makes us move. How are we ticking? How are we moving around? We are moving like the person who's within the chariot. That is the Atma within the body. Another example you can think of is, when you're the driver in a car, right? Now, when you learn how to drive, I don't know about you, one of the hardest things for me was getting used to the feeling that I'm not going to hit the cars parked by the side of the road. Why was that hard? Because I'm driving this big old car. I can look in front. I have to be looking in front because, I don't know, a kid might run out in front of me chasing a ball and I have to get ready to slam on the brakes. But at the same time, I need to know how far the other side of the car goes. So, I'm driving my mom's big old sedan down the street, and I am, I had to keep looking over. Oh my God, am I going to hit the car? Am I going to hit the car? Am I going to hit the car? And constantly trying to get used to it. What happens eventually? Well, eventually I get in the car and I get a feel for, now I'm in the car and I have a feeling like the car is like my body and it extends a certain amount, right? I'm just giving this as an example, but when people get in a fender bender, they'll jump out and they'll say, "You hit me." They don't say, "You hit my car." Well, sometimes people will, but they'll often say, "You hit me," because we get in. It's easier for many of us, at least, to be able to drive a car feeling like it's an extension of your body. And you have a feel for how wide your body is. And if you get in a different car, you adjust your feeling and your perception. Now, some people do that, some people don't. Some people do things a little differently. But just to give one example. So it's this concept of Atma as kind of the driver of the chariot of the body that I wanted to get across here. So I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Again, we talk about the function of mind, intellect, and ego working together as collectively as consciousness. And this is looking at the functional way that we are moving the body as the vehicle for the Atma through life. So let's move on. What are some of the occupations of the mind? So again, this brings us back to the model of thinking, feeling, and willing, right? And the mind is the center of all sense activity. So we mentioned that before. So what's an example? Mind is the center of all sense activity. You perceive one thing one way, I perceive something someone else. You love durian, I absolutely hate it. It's disgusting. Get it out of the room, please. Our perceptions of what is pleasure and what is painful take place in the mind. Again, somebody really might enjoy something that I find painful, and something that I really like to do. Someone else is going to say, "Oh, you'll never get me to do that. That's awful." And our consciousness permeates the entire body through the circulation of vital energy. That's kind of sums up some of the core ideas here. What is the development of consciousness? Now, this is an example that I like to give. I think it helps us to understand how we are involved in activities, okay? So activities develop through this cycle of thinking, feeling, and willing. Let's say I'm sitting on my sofa watching TV, being lazy, and I see somebody eating ice cream on TV. Immediately, I think about it. Hey, it's pretty hot outside today. Ice cream, yes, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream. Ice cream, mint chocolate chip ice cream, vanilla ice cream, cherry ice cream, ice cream, ice cream. I'm thinking about ice cream. If I tell you don't think about ice cream, then your mind is going to say, why is he telling me to not think about ice cream? This is also sometimes used as a tactic. Stop thinking about ice cream. Okay, you really want me to think about ice cream, don't you? Right? What happens when you do all this thinking about ice cream? You start feeling like having some, unless maybe you're somebody who really doesn't like it or whatever. What happens when you develop that feeling? Oh, well, I might get up to go get some. This is also where the intellect might intervene and say, hey, Atul, you know, you are kind of big in the middle, and eating ice cream is not going to help you lose that spare tire. So why don't you go get some water instead, or eat an apple? That's the intellect speaking. Well, sometimes we listen to the intellect and sometimes not. The point is, this is a very simple and silly example, but this is happening all the time. It's like a constant loop that we're on. We think, we feel, we will, we do, and then we have consequences. Our actions lead to consequences. We are constantly sowing the seeds of future action. What are the seeds? The seeds are those desires for other things. So it's kind of a vicious cycle that we're on. And this is given a lot of consideration in yoga process, because the yoga process says that a lot of our suffering in this world is related to karmic activity that we are doing that is related to producing some gain. There is always something that goes along with our activities that will engage us in some other activity, and that we will always get some suffering along with whatever pleasure we are aiming to get. So yoga process says, let's try to reduce the cycle of thinking, feeling, and willing. Let's focus on higher things. Let's focus on the spiritual development path and reduce our involvement in the thinking, feeling, and willing for things that are related to the body. So, you know, in general, that is the goal of most yoga paths. Why is it important for us to understand this from the perspective of Ayurveda? You know, for example, we had this question: how would you get someone to change, to get out of tamogun, to move? Well, you have to understand the cycle of thinking, feeling, and willing first. You know, get the person to think about the thing and think about it in a positive way, and to develop feelings for wanting to change. That is really at the core. If you break down every possible strategy for motivational speaking or whatever, Tony Robbins or whoever, you know, pick whoever you like in terms of someone who does motivational speaking or whatnot, and they're basically following this principle of thinking, feeling, and willing. It's all about trying to get you to think about the change that you want to have in a positive way. And that will, you know, it has to be a strong enough feeling to overcome whatever bad habits are holding you back or pulling you down. That's kind of the trick. So, you know, this is a very important concept. And I'd like you to think about this. Think about this little example of thinking, feeling, and willing. Because, you know, you can come up with ways that this applies in your own life. I know maybe it seems like it's a very silly and very basic idea, but really this is at the heart of what is driving our involvement in activities. And understanding this also is something that is, you know, it's a fundamental thing that we have to do to get people to change their habits. What are some of the effects of action? Okay, this is also an important thing. When we say something, it affects our consciousness. You know, for example, if I'm using and yeah, I do swear. I swear sometimes. You my day job is a software engineer, and I swear. Sometimes there's things that just make me feel like swearing, and it's a release. But if we are speaking with a lot of really foul language, it does have an effect on our consciousness. It does, really. If we say, if our speech is poetic and it's eloquent and it's beautiful and it's pleasant, this will also have a good effect on our consciousness. It will have an effect on the consciousness of people who listen to us. If we are around people who only like to use foul language, like I remember, in my student days, I used to drive a truck in New York, and I would sometimes go to the wholesale produce market, and the guys who worked there, and it was all guys, and their language was pretty, it was pretty crude. It was every third word was the F word. That was just basically the way that they rolled. What we say does affect our consciousness. Also, what we do affects our consciousness. And it's also a matter of what we experience. So everything that we do is having an effect on our consciousness. Everything that we experience affects our consciousness. Everything we say and everything that we hear is having an effect on our consciousness. It may be a little bit at a time. It may be like water wearing down rock, but it does have an effect, especially day after day after day. There are also things called impressions or sanskars. Sanskar means an impression. It means something that leaves a mark on you. And these can be positive sanskars. They can also be very negative. For example, you can run across things that cannot be unseen, negative or disturbing images. I had a job once. I worked at a company that made software for internet content filtering. For companies that wanted to, say, yeah, it would be okay for people to go to a news website when they're at work, but they really don't want you going to, sites with pornographic images or something like that. And there's things that are actually much worse than that out on the internet. In other words, anyway, to make a long story short, they had a room full of people whose job it was to go visit websites and try to categorize. And sometimes they had to see really disturbing images, and they had a high turnover there. It was a really tough job. They had a very hard time keeping people on board in that particular department, because when people would have to see some of these, and there are websites that are dedicated to trying to find the most disturbing possible images, whether they're photoshopped or whether they are actual images. Some people just really love to see disturbing images. That's a very tamasic tendency. But if you see that, it can be very disturbing. And, that's where you get this, I've seen something that can't be unseen. This makes a sanskar or impression. And it's sometimes very hard. We also sometimes go through traumatic experiences. This is a huge problem when you have veterans who've come back, who've seen action in armed conflict, and they come back, they suffer from PTSD. People sometimes have a hard time understanding how veterans with PTSD can have such a hard time fitting in, like have a normal job, commute to work every day, be with your family and not go crazy and not wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat and, start thrashing around. It can be really, really bad for some people. It can make it impossible for them to function in society. This is unfortunately one of the side effects of armed conflict. Positive impressions also, these can also stay with us. If we create positive impressions, they can stay with us. They can keep us and help to elevate our level of consciousness. Okay, so again, this gets back to the question of how do you change? How do you get someone to change the gunas that are associated with their consciousness and their thought patterns? Doing things that create positive impressions. These can do it. Some things that create positive impressions might be doing spiritual activities, participating in in yoga process things like doing kirtan, or visiting visiting spiritually significant places like temples, churches, whatever. Participating in spiritual activities where you're trying to connect to a greater spiritual whole, whatever your belief system is. Doing that actually does create a positive impression, provided somebody is not using that as a mask for putting down others, and in general, that trying to connect with the spiritual path is something that actually creates a positive impression. People have different ways that they try to communicate with the divine. Some people say, well, I'm not religious, but they'll still want to do things for the greater good of humanity, and that's something that gives them a sense of connectedness. It's a part of the Atma. The Atma wants to connect. It has this feeling that I'm part of this spiritual whole, and I want to connect with it. So there are many different ways that we can have positive impressions. We can get positive impressions from nature, like going in a really beautiful natural environment and experiencing something, hearing the sound of water over rocks in a natural place where there's no cars and no parking lot, and you had to walk to get there, and it's just you and the sky and the sun and the wind and the trees and grass and plants. This also creates an impression, and these impressions can stay with us. So these are just some ideas and concepts related to this concept of the effects of action. Conscious and subconscious, these are very important principles. So, we talked about Atma. What did we say about the Atma? Was there a time when the Atma came into existence? Is the Atma born? Or did we say the Atma was unborn? So is the Atma born, or is it unborn? Somebody want to tell me? And there was specifically said, yes, the Atma is unborn. It has always been, and it always will be. So what does that mean? It means that you have experienced previous lives. What happens with the experience of our previous lives? Well, mostly, we don't remember anything about our previous lives, right? We may have some general impressions. Sometimes we get impressions from previous lives. We don't have specific memories, but these impressions are stored in our subconscious. These are in the subconscious or the unconscious mind. We do have impressions. Sometimes these things will lead us to, for example, we may have a fear of water. Maybe I had a bad experience. Maybe I died by drowning in a previous life, and I may just have an irrational fear of water. And somebody might say, well, that's irrational. You shouldn't be afraid of it. Look, you can wear a life jacket. And the person who has that fear is still going to be afraid. It's not going to go away because there's an impression there. My God, I died by drowning in my previous life. I can't put it into those words, but I've got a fear of water and I can't just turn it off. You can fill in the blanks. It could be anything. It could be a fear of heights. It could be, whatever. So we start out this life, we usually have a new set of memories, but we have our old impressions and conditioning. And our impressions from past life may affect us. They may affect us as irrational fears. They may also give us a strong attraction to a particular path in life. Maybe in a previous life, I was a doctor. And I was, maybe I was a doctor who really enjoyed helping people. Maybe I was a rural doctor who helped people who didn't charge a lot of money, who was always there. Everybody in the community could come, and that was my previous life. And when I'm born in this life, that would actually, if I've helped people, that's going to actually give me some advantage in karmic terms, and but it will also give me some inclination. I may have some inclination. I just maybe have a strong inclination. I want to go to medical school. I want to become a doctor, and I don't know why. I just feel that that's the thing for me to do. I may have that strong attraction to that path because it's something that I did. Or, I may have played a musical instrument. I don't remember playing a musical instrument in my past life, but maybe I was really good at it, and I feel like I want to play the violin, and suddenly I find that, well, I can actually play it pretty well. And why is that? Maybe I was a virtuoso in my previous life. So, these are all just examples of how these things can work. But the subconscious, this is another aspect. When we talk about consciousness, we're talking about both the conscious, both the surface thoughts, as well as the subconscious, the undercurrents, the underlying layers of what makes us tick. Conditioning is another important thing. And again, this also gets back to how do you get someone to change their habits. When we have developed bad habits, we have become conditioned to do things a certain way. The longer that has taken place, the harder it is. We learn things. Our parents try to condition us. What are the kind of things that our parents try to condition us to do? You have to eat the things that are healthy for you before you can have snacks. You have to clean your room. You have to bathe in the morning. No, you cannot hang out with those kids that break stuff and take drugs. These are the types of conditioning things that our parents usually try to impose on us. And our actions usually condition us in some way. Now, this again gets back to, how do you change conditioning? It's very hard. A yoga class, that's a chance, that is a choice. It's a choice that where we're choosing mental conditioning, physical conditioning, circulation of prana, helping to clear things that may muddy the waters of consciousness. There are a lot of things that introduce conditioning. Martial arts usually involves conditioning, involves physical conditioning as well as mental conditioning, and people sometimes follow practices over many years. The point is that the mind adapts. This is a very important concept. I want you to think about this. Think about how the mind adapts. The mind adapts sometimes slowly, but it's always adapting. We are rotating our perspective. We are seeing things in a different light. Sometimes somebody says something that makes me look at things in a different way, for example, politically, I used to be against spending too much money on social welfare programs. And then I started thinking of it more like, well, what happens when people are not, become desperate and they do not have options? Because I don't believe in just, owing the world a living, but okay, then I started seeing it a little differently. Then I started seeing, well, if I wanted to actually be in a community, I would rather be in a community where people are not desperate and people don't go bankrupt because they can't afford to pay medical bills. These are just things we will change over the course of our lifetime. We sometimes change our position on things 180 degrees, but we usually do it a little bit at a time. This is my point here. We sometimes slowly adapt, but we're always adapting. And conditioning can be very hard to break. This is the thing. Once we are conditioned to do things a certain way, it can be very, very hard to change our conditioning. Mind as a sponge. Now, this is another thing. Now we're talking about going beyond the function of consciousness as something that, resides as a function of the brain organ. But it also has this kind of subtle effect in existence. It's a sponge. So, you put a sponge in ink, it's going to absorb ink. It's going to get dirty. If you put a sponge in dirty water, it's going to also become dirty. You have to put the sponge in clean water, and you have to wash it and rinse it, and sometimes you have to use some soap. And sometimes you have to rinse and rinse and rinse, and it takes a while for these things to come out. The mind is also like a sponge. We absorb the emotions of others. If we are around people who have a particular emotional state, we pick up on it. We have kind of a little radar. Some people do not have much of that. Some people are just not that sensitive to the emotions of others. Other people, I am definitely one. We're very, very sensitive to the emotions of others. And if people have a lot of negative thoughts, we pick up on that. And, we sometimes feel like we would like to avoid that type of thing. Other people don't really radiate their emotions that much. We also radiate emotions. So I may be feeling something and I radiate the emotion. Common emotions that get radiated are emotions like lust, when someone is just feeling a physical desire. And, I think many women are going to testify that they can feel when somebody's looking at them and, they just have lustful intentions. They feel bad. It feels, oh, my God, I felt like I had to take a bath. It's an unfortunate thing that people are in such a state of consciousness that they only think in terms of the sensuality, and they don't actually respect others, and they're only looking at other person's bodies as a potential source of enjoyment. That radiates, that kind of negative consciousness radiates, and it can be picked up. We also can radiate things. We can radiate consciousness. We can radiate our emotional state. And, so the point is that the mind is a type of subtle entity. It's not just some chemical process in the brain. It's a subtle entity. It radiates emotion, and it can pick up on emotion. We just try to understand the mind through these analytical processes, through these, through these exercises in understanding how the mind works. So again, we can feel the presence of others. We can sense others' consciousness also sometimes. If we're sitting close to someone and their consciousness is really bad, we sense it. I sense like, oh my God, I would rather have some space between myself and this other person. Sometimes we're around people who are spiritually developed, and we sense their consciousness, and we sense, hey, I actually like being around this person. I feel that, being around this person, I am feeling more free and more enlightened and very positive. And sometimes, let's say, you're riding public transport, you're on the bus, and you just feel this negative energy. Wow, I got such a bad vibe from that person. And there are a lot of people in this day and age who are running around, and they've got really bad, very animalistic, or even worse than animal consciousness. Bad actions, bad thoughts, bad speech, these are all things that will lead to bad consciousness. And when there's a very large accumulation of negative emotion, negative consciousness, it spills out into the environment. And again, this gets back to the concept of macrocosm and microcosm. So I'd like everybody, if you could give me one example of a place where you felt that there was a lot of negativity that you feel considering this, what we're talking about here. Tell me one place that you went to where you felt there was a lot of negative consciousness that had spilled out into the environment. And even if there weren't other people around who were, radiating that, you felt like it was sticking to the place. And you don't have to name names if you don't want to. Just say, I visited one hotel, or I went to a city, or a place in a city, or something like that. Just give an example. Yeah, political events. Yep, okay. I can definitely see that. A museum, yes. And yep, okay. Definitely. I can relate to that too, I think. A crystal store, oh yeah, uh-huh. Yep. Alternative school, okay, yep. Oh yeah, yeah. I think we also had an experience with one school that Monica went to. So yeah, these are all, it's not really hard to think of these kind of examples. I think that, people who are trying to pursue the path in Ayurveda, they are generally people who are in touch, who are aware, and who have more of a sattvic inclination, and who really want to develop themselves in terms of their awareness of these things. Now, let's also think about positive places. Can you think of places that you visited where you felt that there was, kind of a positive balance, where you felt that you were coming to a place where you felt there was positive energy that had pervaded and had accumulated? You know, just give an example of that. Okay. Favorite restaurant, yoga studio. Okay. Yeah. All right. And yeah. Okay. So these are we can do things and we can have activities in a place that can accumulate positive energy. We can visit places where we feel something that we didn't feel when I walked into the room. And this can come from doing repeated positive activities in a place. And this is also something, if you're doing treatment, if you do massage, and that's something, you can, most states you can get a license and you can do it. Even here, we're able to do it from home as well. But, you have a room for it and you do things there that create a positive environment, and you do it continuously. It's something that people can also pick up on when they come for that. So anyway, these are just principles of the mind, how the mind is a radiator of emotion, and how places will tend to accumulate either positive or negative. So this, I think we have pretty much reached the end of what I wanted to cover today. We talked about what is the Atma. The Atma is that spiritual spark. It's that spark of divine energy. And what is Ahankar? It is the ego, the sense of identity, the thing that links the non-material Atma to the material world. What is consciousness? Consciousness is our function of awareness and thinking, feeling, willing, and knowledge, the mind and intellect working together. The mind is the part of us that does the thinking, feeling, and willing. The mind resides mostly in the heart. And what are the properties of the mind? So I think we've had a good interactive session today. And any other questions that we have before closing here? I think we've had a good session, and I'm going to just pause recording and see if there's any other thing that we have to cover.